This is the American Arson Podcast, where our goal is to spark creativity. Whether you're a musician, an artist, a writer, or an entrepreneur, we're here to provide you with tools, tips, and insight from professionals and creatives that you can use to inform and inspire your own journey.
Hey guys, so today we have Mason and Cullen from the BlackSheep Podcast, also partnered with HM Magazine, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. They've done countless interviews on their podcast with some pretty incredible artists of all sizes, local and mainstream artists that you've heard of. We get into a lot of stuff.
Yeah, this was a really, really fun one. And they have, obviously, as you can probably imagine, a lot of really cool stories. I think they could provide a little bit of inspiration for anybody who's looking to kind of kickstart their creative project to the next level. And even though this is not a musical guest, you'll all be very happy to know that we still managed to get a tour story of sorts out of them. And it is
It
one
might
that
be the one of the more interesting ones we've had yet.
it's one that you won't want to miss. And that's I'm not going to say any more about it.
That's a very accurate assessment.
Yeah.
No, it ends up being quite hilarious, so make sure you stay till the end. In the meantime, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and give the video a like and hit the subscribe button right below the video. Also make sure to check out their links to their podcast and socials, etc. Right below in the description as well. Those likes and subscribes help us know what content you're liking. It also helps us be able to get some more of these videos and podcasts out to you guys. If you're listening on the other platforms as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff, make sure to give it a follow, that does the same thing for us, and we appreciate all the support throughout this year. And we're ready to keep churning out these podcasts for you. So also let us know if there's anyone you want to see on. We'd love to talk to them and have a good time sharing some crazy tour stories involving seagulls and bathroom mishaps. So yeah, here's Mason and Cullen. All right, so guys, today we have Mason and Cullen from the BlackSheep Podcast. And if you didn't see, a couple months ago, we actually appeared on their podcast. It was a great episode. Their recent guests have been really interesting and made for some great content too. So make sure to go check that out. But when we appeared on their podcast, at the end of the podcast, we let you guys know about this really killer product that we've been pushing in stores over the past year or so. So Evan, I don't know if you want to remind people about
I do.
what we partnered up with them on.
Yeah, in fact, I spend most of my day wanting to remind people about this. And sometimes I just tell strangers that walk by me. But yeah, everybody knows it's tough times for live musicians right now. And so we've gotten creative and we've partnered with Toad's cream chip beef, corned beef hash combo cans, which you can pick up in your local supermarket. And it's half and half. It's half a can of cream chipped beef and half a can of corned beef hash. And you can it's the perfect pandemic canned food because it's a way to stay connected. You can eat half of it. First of all, it keeps really well, but you can eat the half that you like, if that's the cream chip beef or the corned beef hash half, and then you can send it along to a friend either via the U.S. mail, and it'll probably arrive about 3.5 to 4 weeks later, or you can drop it on their doorstep for contact-free delivery, and they can eat the other half. So basically,
you're not wrong.
Yeah. So we put this out there on your podcast, and we've had some really great feedback. But we just wanted to know if either of you guys had a chance to sample this fine culinary masterpiece that we've got in stores right now.
Oh my
It has
gosh.
ruined all of my New Year's resolution goals. It is just
we
totally
are
obliterated
we're
them.
only a week into the to 2021. It's good to hear that it's already spoiled things
Well,
for you.
sorry, but not sorry, because hopefully it was ruined in an enjoyable way.
Oh, absolutely. I don't regret it at all, but it has ruined those goals.
So are we talking about a dip? Did we have it straight? Did you sprinkle it
Okay,
over some
so
tortilla
here's my
chips, or-
problem. I think you asked the perfect question. Did I have it straight? No, you specifically said it was only the dented cans, right?
That's
So
true.
I got one that did not come out straight. So definitely I was eating it kind of dented. I
Well,
guess
we
you could
had to
say.
we had to save money somehow. So when we went to buy the back stock, we bought all the dented cans, but they taste just as good as
They
the
do.
non-dented cans, as long as you didn't
But-
get one that punctured. So
Yeah, I like to actually put it on donuts. Is that weird?
oh, that is extremely weird.
Yeah, I was trying to push the boundaries of what this miracle mystery thing could
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Not even
it
his
seemed like
dogs
it was
will
best
eat
on
it.
donuts.
Not even
I
his dogs. Wow. I mean, I know some people have really picky dogs, but I would
My
say,
dogs won't touch it.
I mean, if we had to be honest, better than Spam, worse than chili, right? If we're kind of in that middle.
Well, you see, I really want to help you guys out with your promotion, but I am a Spam lover.
Oh, wow.
Of the next degree.
think I've
I mean,
ever-
I eat it at least once a week.
Oh man.
That seems like it might be a joke, but it's not.
I don't know what.
So-
Yeah, I don't know where we're being serious and where we're not.
So in the spirit of honesty, we have some news for you guys, and any of you that actually bought this whole thing probably need to reevaluate how much truth you put in your culinary podcast knowledge,
Yeah.
because it has all been fake. And we're sorry. We know we're probably going to be trending on Twitter, and this is going to cause some massive controversy over the lies we've been spreading
Yeah, because
about
there's nothing else going on in the world today. So
I was just
about
gonna
our
say.
hash cans over the past half a year. But we're sorry we duped you. But
I did hear that was what was thrown through the Capitol windows.
There you go.
throwing the dented cans cheaper than bricks.
Yeah, that's right. I will say, Jesse, to their credit, to your listeners' credit, it wasn't like there was a Snopes article about it. So
Right, that's a good point.
True.
How much they could have fact checked
True.
about it, it's kind of a little different.
Well, we wanted to start
Very
with
true.
this because we were very curious. We kind of have our feature that people know us, that we're kind of used to, and we'll get to this at the end of the episode, but talking about kind of funny, crazy, self-deprecating, disastrous like stories about live music. And you guys told us right before the podcast started that your thing is kind of like having somebody pitch something that may or may not actually exist. So we were wondering, A, how did you get the idea for that? And B, what are some of the crazier things that you've ever had people try to pitch?
Well, your guys is definitely the craziest. It kind of, I think it came to me.
It still takes the can.
before. Yeah, it still takes the can. That's right. It came to me like real quick because I was just like tired because no one ever wants to listen to the plugs.
Right.
at
Okay.
the end-
Good
at the end of
point.
the show, they're like, all right, yeah, okay, I'll go find it. or
Right,
whatever.
right.
So I figured if we just add like some dumb thing to it
Right. Okay.
that gets people like, wait, what did they just say? Did they say that they were doing this? Then people get like super interested and maybe they'll actually listen to the plugs. So, and plus it's funny,
Yeah.
it's entertaining.
We've had some really good ones. Again, yours certainly takes a can. I will say though, our last episode that just came out yesterday,
Okay.
so January 5th, I don't know when this is coming out, but January 5th, we did an episode with the Oh Hellos, which, if you're in the folk world at all, you definitely know of that band. But they, anyway, they did a pitch where they were supposedly making music for this HGTV show of like haunted houses. And they just ran with it so well. It was sort of similar to your, like you guys, like Evan, you just kind of just ran with it. Like, I don't know how the idea, and then you both just went with it. It was great. And that's exactly how Maggie and Tyler did it. It was
Awesome.
So
Great to hear.
I mean, you
Insane.
couldn't tell if they were serious or joking.
Right.
And I was just like with yours, I was like trying to hold back my laugh so it wasn't coming through on the mic.
Now, have you guys ever gotten any feedback from people that thought that the thing was real, or any feedback on on those segments, not ours in particular, but in general? Or
I think in general, most people are just too embarrassed to, if they do fall for it, I think they're either too embarrassed that they fell for it,
Right.
or they're like, there's no way that's real.
Right.
It must be a joke. So either they get the joke or they're too embarrassed to see if it is a joke.
yeah,
I
okay,
think.
that makes
So
sense.
no, we haven't gotten anything specifically.
It's a nice bit of flavor that you guys added, and I really enjoyed it. And it was, yeah,
Quite as good as the flavor from those wonderful cans.
yeah, the dented cans, man, you just can't beat it. Well, I suppose that's a natural segue to kind of introduce what you guys do. So for people who maybe haven't heard the show before, because I think probably every white dude between the ages of 23 and 38 who lives in the United States during the pandemic right now has a podcast. So you guys want to tell people what you're all
Yeah.
you want to tell people what you're all about?
Yeah. So like you all said before, we host a podcast called the BlackSheep Podcast. And it's sort of taken on a few different iterations over the years, but over the last year, we have been interviewing different bands, mainly from the sort of face down, tooth and nail scene, some that are current bands, some that were bands at one point in that scene. But, we have interviewed a number of other artists too. Like, I mentioned, we just interviewed the Oh Hellos, but I would say the vast majority of the bands that we've been chatting with come from that tooth and nail and face down scene, which is exactly the scene that Cullen and I grew up with.
Cool.
Our friendship really is sort of glued by the face down and tooth and nail scene. And so to be able to chat with a lot of people who we really respect, but not only just respect, but some of the people who are legitimately heroes of ours, has just been like kind of a dream come true. So we kind of chat with these bands about kind of their history, their legacy, any new things that they're up to, about faith, if they're a band of faith, and all of those sort of different things. So we love kind of getting into those some heavier topics about their music.
Okay.
And it's just been an absolute joy to chat with them about it.
Well, that was one thing that you mentioned, and either of you guys can kind of pitch in on this, like the range of artists too that you guys have interviewed is wild. I mean, you have, one moment you have little old American Arson on, and then like the next moment you're having Craig Mabbitt or Guar or whoever pop on the podcast. Like you guys, like it's both in notoriety and like you said, maybe primarily in that tooth and nail and face down scene, but also being able to kind of step outside that too occasionally. What's that been like? And was that something that was done kind of purposefully to kind of diversify, or was that just kind of by chance?
Well, Mason and I definitely have an eclectic taste of music, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
We listen to everything. It doesn't matter what it is. It just so happens that, like probably our deepest roots are in kind of the more hardcore metal rock scene.
Yeah.
And so that tends to be like the vast majority of people that we like to interview. But I mean, we just had a folk band on, and we love them as well. And that's kind of how Mason and I's journey has been. So we're just trying to kind of stay true to ourselves with bands we like. We're not going to have on bands that we're not like huge fans of.
Right.
We've made that pretty clear.
Cool.
But we also have to definitely thank HM Magazine, because they help us. Or they help hook us up with some of these artists that like we never would have dreamed of. Like Sonny Sandoval from POD was
I just saw that.
an
Wow.
amazing thing to be able to get to talk to him. And we definitely would not have been able to do that without HM Magazine and the partnership that we have with them. So
now,
big shout out.
is that something that how did that come about? Did you guys pitch it to them? They come to you, or how did that work?
Yeah, do you want me to tell you the story, Cullen?
Yeah.
Kind of fun one. So like I mentioned, Cullen and I have been doing this podcast for a while, and it again took a number of different iterations. But sort of this last iteration, and probably will remain the final iteration of the podcast, is we started interviewing a number of these bands. And what sometime last year, around this time last year, I would say, we really kind of leaned more into interviewing different artists. And one thing that we noticed, especially, you know, when we would interview a band like Earth Groans from Solid State, or we got somehow connected to Andy Atkins from A Plea for Purging.
Yeah, cool. We had
We were
him on
doing
as well.
those sort of, so we were doing some of those interviews, and we noticed that people were listening to those ones versus the more kind of talk oriented episodes that were just between Cullen and I.
Okay.
We were just talking about whatever. And so we were like, well, maybe we really need to focus more in on that. And we really enjoyed doing those interviews. And so we kind of were like, let's kind of focus more in on that. And so we were, based on my own like personal connections, Cullen's own personal connections, we were just trying to make these things happen as much as we could. And typically we were only getting about one episode a month, just based on, again, it's not like we were ourselves musicians that were in that scene. We were just simply fans. So we didn't really have a ton of personal connections with a lot of these bands and artists. But at one point, I would say it was sometime in like July or August, but I have a friend that writes for HM Magazine. And again, Cullen and I grew up reading HM Magazine. And yeah, this friend kind of reached out, noticed that we were doing some of these interviews with these artists that HM had traditionally and historically been covering. And he just said something along the lines of, I think, like, hey, if you'd be interested in interviewing our owner at some point, that would be great.
Oh, cool.
And we were like, oh, that would be awesome. We'd love to interview the owner. But I don't know I don't know if it was their idea or if it was my idea. Somebody had an idea of like, well, let's make it more than an interview. Like, let's see if there's actually something here. And so that's kind of how that whole partnership happened, is let's make this thing happen. And so the logistics worked out really perfectly. They were looking for a podcast to have. We were looking for some sort of better connections with all of this kind of music world that we were interested in interviewing. And so they had the connections, we had the podcast, and all the logistics worked out really well. And so they were like, well, we'll just continue throwing musicians at you, and you keep interviewing them and putting episodes out. And we were like, great, that's exactly all we could ask for. And so it just worked out really perfectly. It's done really, really well. I was just texting Cullen this last night, but again, we had this episode with the Oh Hellos come out, and it like tripled our previous number of downloads that we had before.
Wow.
So like, it's just done really well for us, and we've just been really excited about that partnership, and HM seems to be really excited about it too.
And I think like the part that's so weird about it is like Mason and I are going on our 5th year of doing podcasts.
Oh,
together.
wow.
I mean, we've been doing this forever. But basically, as soon as like we kind of like figured out that this is the thing we want to do in terms of interviewing artists and things like that, and creatives that we really like, we just said, all right, we're saying goodbye to the past, and we're deleting all those old episodes, and we're gonna kind of start afresh. And so if you were a fan of ours, I don't know if there's a ton of fans of ours from way back when, but sorry that you lost all those old episodes, but you did.
They weren't that good anyway.
Was that difficult to do?
It's a good question. It was for me a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah, I do kind of all the tech stuff on it, and so I'm publishing and everything. And there was at one point, I was kind of flipping through all of those really old episodes, and I was kind of listening through, and more than anything, it was kind of nostalgic of like us, young, novice, we had no idea what we were doing, and just hearing the audio quality just absolutely shitty, and like all of that was just really fun to kind of go back to. And it's one of those things where you kind of shed a tear. It's like moving away from like a house that you grew up in or whatever. Well, these were my humble beginnings, and you're kind of saying goodbye to it, but it's because there's bigger and better things out there. And so it does kind of feel like we've restarted. It almost feels like we're in our first year of doing this podcast, even though again we've been doing this for a while, but it really does sort of feel like we're in our first year, and we kind of sort of have transitioned our podcast into feeling as if it's that.
It's crazy because I think that's something that comes up in the music world a lot too. I mean, it's basically a meme at this point of the fans kind of want to hear the older stuff, and a lot of times the bands are ready to move on from it. And our podcast, when we started it, we wanted to connect with creatives of all different types, and it's mostly slanted towards the music world just because that's the world that we happen to be in. And so it's funny because I can really, I mean, I bet you guys have a lot of kindred spirits in the music world who would look back and say, oh man, if I could go back onto Spotify and delete some of that stuff that we started as, and I mean, some of it it's maybe a band. I think now, because we're living in an era where you don't have to tour, 300 days out of year to continue to be a band. You've got bands, more and more bands that are hanging around for a longer and longer time. And some of them are looking back and thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these songs that, I wrote when I was 18 or 19 or whatever. So I think that's something that all of us kind of experience in the creative world and kind of go through. But there's something just like liberating about that fresh start and saying like, no, this is the starting point, and everything from here on out has, this level of quality. I don't know if that's something that you guys felt, but
Evan, it kind of sounds like you're trying to pad yourself for a solo career.
No, but
yeah, that's what I'm
See you,
hearing.
Jesse. Nice knowing you.
Oh my gosh, no, because actually I started American Arson before Jesse was around, and when I look back,
he tried it. He couldn't do it. Vocalists think they can do it on their own, but then they realize they need their drummers to hold everything together.
Yeah, well, I kept running out of batteries on my drum machine, so I needed to figure something that could keep going after that. But I mean, no, I'll look back at the first. I guess I like the first American Arson EP, but the second one tried to kind of go in like an acoustic direction, and like it's still up for posterity and everything. But I think looking back, it was an experiment. It was something that I decided we probably wouldn't go in that direction again. And then when Jesse came into the band, we were both kind of in agreement about the direction that we wanted to go. So it wasn't really something that we explored again. But there is sort of that kind of like lingering in the back of your mind, like, man, if a new person comes and they just so happen to click on something from that EP first, like, yeah, they might be out of here before they really get to hear like what we think is our best stuff. So
yeah. That's got to be just so scary. I mean, imagine if your yearbooks are just hanging out.
Yeah,
and,
if my yearbook's on Spotify.
You keep your like imagine like if you had like your yearbook in like on a business card. Every time you give out your business card, you're also handing off your yearbook to anyone you meet and anyone you don't meet. It's just hanging out up there. To me, like that's one of the things about musicians that I find absolutely endearing, because that's such a hard on your sleeve type thing. And I know like musicians kind of move in that direction to start with, but that's just such a tough thing to get over in my mind.
That's why I love going through your Facebook photos, Cullen. You can go really far back.
It's kind of the same thing. I mean, you
get
know,
that
there's
first EP kind of photo.
Right. Yeah, and there's people that go back and delete the old ones, because they don't feel like that's them
I've done
anymore.
that a couple of times. Yeah. I there's been a couple of times I like scrolled back. I think I do it like every year or two now, where like I scroll back and I'll see something from a few years ago, and I'm just like, God, why, Jesse, why? And I just like, I try and scroll back up to the top of the page and forget it, but then I'm like laying in bed at 3 a.m. with that image burning in my mind, and I just can't get it out of my head. And I'm like, nope, gotta start over. That's I roll into work exhausted the next morning, and they're like, what, you feeling all right? Yeah, just just life. Life hit me.
So I guess kind of like diving a little bit deeper into the podcast and the people that you guys are able to talk to, something that Jesse and I had talked about, and I don't know if it's ever been expressly stated or if this is something that's been told to, or talked about with you guys or whatever, but many people who are familiar with HM, for those of us that have kind of followed it for a while, you always kind of wonder, you guys, you have this coverage of pretty much all heavy music, but there's this maybe extra bit of focus on bands that are sort of, I don't even know how to define it, I guess in the Christian market. Some of them would call themselves Christian bands. Some of them would say, don't put that label on us. Some of them would, move in and out of it.
Exact opposite.
Right. Yeah. Some of them would say, yes, please put that label on us and we're going to play
Guar's pretty Christian.
Right. So, I guess we were curious about, is that an explicit, intentional thing to kind of meld the two together, or how, I guess, is there any sort of directive that you guys have gotten with the podcast, or how does that work?
Well, let me just first say we're not a Christian podcast. We're Christians in a podcast. So.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
See,
Well,
even
that's
you're not in a
honestly-
band and you can still claim the oldest oldest line. And
I told Evan like that one of the like, even in your guys' podcast, as I see all the guests you guys have on, it's really kind of staying true to this. But like, I grew up, even I'm a little younger, and I grew up even getting the original HM issues and stuff like that, and they were played a huge part in me finding out about some of those bands in more of the mainstream market, growing up as a church kid and being into heavy music, and then having this magazine that kind of had a foot in both worlds per se.
Right.
And I think it's been really cool to see how you guys with your podcast have been able to do that as well. You're, like you said, you have a lot of people on from that tooth and nail scene, but then you have an artist like Guar on, or someone, and which is equally as interesting, and if not more so, like, is really cool to see. So I just curious about that too, and what that's been like for you guys to explore and everything.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. When we got involved with HM, David Stay, the guy who runs HM, he basically just said, "You guys do whatever you want. Like, I don't care who you guys have on. Like, you guys do your thing. You guys have been doing this for a while. Go do your thing." So we have had zero directive from HM. It really is just kind of bands that we're interested in. I mean, it's bands that we find we really like, bands that like to push the envelope and have something interesting to say, and it's not fluff. It's not just the typical things that you'll always see from scenes or from anything like that. And lots of bands have drama, and sometimes we have to. Actually, there was this one time we've been censored by a band. We won't. It'll go unnamed for right now.
Where you mean they asked you afterwards to like delete something, or
beforehand?
No, beforehand.
Beforehand. Like, there was like all of a sudden, like right beforehand, there was a list of things we couldn't talk about.
Oh,
and
wow.
It's like all the things we were going to talk about.
Of course, yeah.
Then their promoter got on, or manager or whoever got on the Zoom call with us and was like listening in and like giving us like, "You have 5 minutes left. You have 10 minutes." And we're like, "What the heck is this? We don't like this. We're never doing this again. We're making sure this never happens again." So like, we want to stay true to trying to understand the artist's mind, trying to understand the artist's creativity. We're not interested in trying to censor anything or anything like that. So,
well, I think that it's definitely true that there is authenticity both inside and outside of the, whatever you want to call it, Christian market, faith-based, whatever you want to call it. And from our experience, playing at both, playing in both markets, it really, there's no like delineation where you're going to find more authenticity here or more authenticity there. There's people faking it everywhere. There's people faking it in the church. There's people faking it in the punk scene. There's people faking it everywhere. And I would have to imagine, especially as a podcaster, you guys are talking about, where you are doing this whole thing so that you can dive into the deeper side of artists that you really appreciate, and then to have somebody come on and say essentially like, "Nah, here's the version that you're going to put forth." I mean, that must have been extremely frustrating.
Yeah. And you could tell, like, as soon as we started pushing the envelope a little bit, that's when like, "You have 15 minutes left," like flashed on our screen. I mean, and stuff like that. Like, we really want to avoid that. Like, we want authenticity. That's what our listeners crave. I mean, that's what fans want.
Yeah, I think
authentic music is big.
I think people, I honestly, I don't even think people realize it. I think that there is, as humans, we have this natural hunger and thirst for authenticity, and that we're drawn towards authentic things. And we're also drawn towards the cheap and the, those kind of things as well. But I think deep down, we were, and I'm obviously getting a little bit heavy here, but I think that we were created to seek authenticity in everything.
Absolutely.
And so, I can imagine, because, like I said before, we have all types of creatives on this show, but a lot of times musicians, but I definitely consider, what you guys do as totally a creative outlet, looking for ways to bring out the stories and mindsets and like all these things that go into these artists, you know, either live shows or albums or whatever it happens to be. You know, people like you allow us to kind of share that next level of, you know, I mean, not every band has a podcast where they can get on and say like, hey, this is what we meant by this when we said this, and let us clarify this. And you're certainly not going to get on the stage and do that, because then your time's going to be up really, really fast, or somebody's going to yell either shut up and rock or play Freebird. And so we definitely appreciate you guys kind of pushing for that, for the authentic, because that's something that we've committed to as a band. And you know, we've kind of always gravitated towards other people that feel the same way. So I don't know if there's a question in that. It's just
no.
patting you on the back, I guess.
I got somewhere we can go with this. We're also podcasters.
Right.
You know how this goes. So I totally agree with you. And I would say for Mason and I, one of our biggest heroes, or band heroes, I should say, growing up was the Chariot.
Okay.
And we both listened to that first album, and we were like, okay, this is weird.
Yeah.
It's good. I don't know if I love it.
Yeah.
And then the Chariot started coming out with all these videos, and they were just absolutely insane. It was all tour life videos, and it was just them just doing stupid stuff all around the country in their van, shooting off fireworks inside their van, and dancing with homeless people and giving hot sauce to seagulls. And we were like, oh my gosh, they're just like us.
Yeah.
And so Mason and I, from that, like all of a sudden the Chariot became like this thing where not only like we were interested in the band themselves, but we were interested in what they had to say.
Yeah.
On top of that. And it created a connection that was way more deep, or was way deeper and much more, I would say 3D.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just like this two-dimensional, like, oh, that's good music. It's also good music. It's also a good message. It's also the fact that they're real people behind there, and they don't feel like gods anymore, or they don't feel like the untouchable anymore. They feel like people we're interested in, and that it's just real. It's authentic, like you're talking about. So.
Yeah. I think if there's any goal that we have to the podcast, it's really to reveal the human behind the music. And yeah, I think Cullen hit the nail on the head on that, of the kind of questions, the kind of conversations that we're wanting to have with, again, people who are heroes or people who we've been listening to for many, many years. We really want to get to know who they are. And we want to share that with the rest of the world. And so I think there's a lot of us who grew up fans of these bands and who grew up fans of this scene.
Yeah.
And they really want to know who are the people that were behind the music that they grew up and love. And that's exactly, those are the exact kind of conversations we're really hoping to share in the podcast.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, we started this whole thing. We had been talking, about different ideas even before COVID came along. We had started this whole thing, and one of my just like deepest kind of questions was just sort of to dive into the creative process of everybody else. And I don't know how much we've really shared this. I know Jesse talked about it a little bit on another podcast, but I got really, really deep into some nasty writer's block before we went in to record A Line in the Sand, and we had to push the recording back 2 different times because I just couldn't come up with anything. And, you know, I felt a lot of guilt, towards the label, towards Jesse. And not that Jesse isn't involved in the songwriting. He's very involved, but, you know, I kind of come with that root idea. And for me, one of the things that I was just so interested in was getting to talk to other creative people and getting into their process. And I think that something that we've discovered so far from doing this is, man, I don't know that we've talked to a single inauthentic person yet. And there's no like consistent there's no consistent thing across all of these people, other than the fact that they're all trying to be real. It's not like everybody is the person that wakes up at 7 a.m. and really gets on their grind and makes sure that their creative juices are flowing, or everybody is the person that, reads 1,000 pages of whatever literature, and then that inspires their lyrics. Like, people are all over the map.
There's no uniformed way, perfect way for, everyone to be their authentic selves, or to be like, same one of my favorite mental health advocates and writers was just posted a huge write up on this of like, like not everyone is the person who is going to be at their 100% best mentally by getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym for 3 hours and
Like
being in
Evan does,
like,
right?
yeah, yeah, as you can tell. But like that may work for some people. Maybe that's some people's way of finding peace or jogging their creativity, and that's awesome. Maybe for some people, they have a crazy busy job or home life, and their way to get their creative juices flowing and kind of just be themselves is to get home in that free time and just pop down on the couch and zero out and play some video games or watch Netflix or podcast or whatever it is, and I think like you guys said, and you guys do a really good job about of bringing that authenticity out of your guests and it's really cool to see because um it's something like you said, you mentioned there with the chariot. I remember watching a couple Under Oath DVDs back in the day.
Yes.
And
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember
Oh my God.
I remember
Cullen
specifically
stole those of
one
mine.
scene. I
Oh,
I remember
man,
specifically
beef.
one scene that sticks with me to this day. And there was a scene on one of their DVDs of them doing the gallon challenge in a
Oh
parking
my
lot.
Yep.
And I remember seeing that and just being like, this is awesome. Like, I want to go on tour and drink a gallon of milk and throw up in a Walmart parking lot. Like that, like
Such a high goal for yourself.
so I mean, and I can't say we haven't. I mean, it's it's probably ate a few too many tacos from Taco Bell in a Walmart parking lot a couple of times, but like, but really, that is like the kind of thing that would take certain bands to that next level for me, is seeing that deeper side of humanity to them and what they're all about in their day-to-day lives, or eh, what the lives they live outside of just what we see on stage.
I think that's what was
Yeah.
so unique about the Tooth and Nail and Face Down scene, was you had so many of those kind of characters who were really legitimately real people. Whether it's a band that's dumpster divers, yet at the same time they're like the most philosophical band you've ever heard, or like we've been talking about Under Oath and the Chariot, and then a whole slew of bands like that. Plea for Purging was they were doing the same kind of shit too. Like there were so many bands from that scene that really embodied that really well. And so I think that was part of their uniqueness. I think that was part of what fascinated so many of us fans by them, was how real they seemed, even compared to their more mainstream peers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great observation. And I like what Jesse said too about, everybody kind of having their own individual way that they, I guess, hit the grind, and it's not always about, yeah. My favorite part of going to the gym is that I get to drink a protein shake afterwards, and I like protein shakes. So like that's
Strawberry flavored.
yeah, my brother has kind of made it more enjoyable for me because he's a fitness professional, and so he's kind of like directed me of what I should do. But and there are days when I get up and I do that, and I feel like, okay, everything is I'm ready to go. And then there's days where I wake up and it's like 10:30, and I'm like, what in the world am I doing with myself? Because I don't have a job where I have to go in super early in the morning or anything, and I'm self-paced throughout the day. But I think that is kind of something that it's something that creatives deal with all the time, and now the whole rest of the world is being let in on this process because of the pandemic, where a lot of people are at home.
Yeah.
They're maybe some of them are working from home. Many people are working from home, but having to set their own schedule, having to find their own motivation without a boss staring over their shoulder and saying like, are you doing this or are you doing that, or without the other people kind of peer pressuring them into doing their work or not doing their work, or whatever it happens to be. But I was just wondering if that's something that you guys have found, obviously, since you focus on music and bands, and I think that the best part for all of us of music is getting to go and see it live. Has that been different for you guys since this has started? Or do you find yourself kind of just asking the same, like, so what are you doing during the pandemic questions, or have you found ways to kind of shake things up and not kind of get stuck in that rut?
Yeah, that's a good question. We were definitely asking that question a lot early on. But now we're kind of taking it as a given, and we're, instead of asking, "Oh, how are things doing? What is it like, releasing a record during the pandemic?"
Right.
Now we're asking more questions like, how has this pandemic actually affected you? What's your mental health at throughout this? Do you feel like, your writing style is taking a hit, or do you think it's getting better, or do you think that, um, do you just feel like you can't feel anything? Because for me, like, I personally, like, at times I'm just like, man, it feels hard to feel anything because there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to almost like compare notes, like, hey, what are you feeling? And that's really all it is. I don't know what Mason, how do you feel about that? I guess that's not a question I've ever asked you.
Yeah, I think other than the fact that it just feels so over asked at this point, I
Yeah.
think everybody's sort of asking that question. It almost, feels like, when a college kid gets back home, like, well, how was the semester, or like, what are your grades, or whatever. It's like, I
Right.
don't, that's not the question I'm interested in talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think most people are in general, like, how are you during the pandemic question, people are just not interested. But yeah, I think that kind of those deeper questions about how the pandemic has affected their lives, and more broadly, I think are really interesting to them. It allows them to maybe that's the first time they've been asked that, or have asked that of themselves. And so I think those questions tend to be a little bit better, and reveal, again, a little bit more of the human
Yeah.
in behind the music. And yeah, so I think those are a little bit more interesting just because of how they reveal that humanity behind that music that we've all loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I guess since we're talking about humanity and like just being authentic and just kind of circling around that, obviously, with HM's kind of bent, and with some of the bands that you guys have interviewed being in that kind of face down, tooth and nail world, and you guys not being afraid to ask real, authentic questions, what is it like discussing, the faith aspect of bands that there it's so every band's approach is so different, because some of them, they're like, we want to dip a toe in that market because we want people to ask us to come and play Life Fest, but we
Right.
also don't want to lose a tour with a big mainstream band, because everybody finds out that we are whatever, that we have, that we have one of our songs about God or something like that. So is that something that you feel like our bands sometimes hesitant or reluctant to talk to it, or have people kind of opened up to you guys and been more like forthcoming?
From my experience, it seems like bands are usually they've usually got that question nailed down. They know what they're going to say in that situation. They know how they're going to go about it. And I think that they play it a little bit. If there's ever an inauthentic moment, I think sometimes it comes on that question where, bands kind of almost can that answer. And then
Okay.
also what you get is sometimes you'll see that, depending on who they're talking to, they're going to shade the way that they talk a little bit differently to people like Mason and I, where they know that it's HM is a relatively, HM and BlackSheep are a relatively faith-based market. Whereas, if they're talking to Rolling Stone, they would say something totally different.
Gotcha.
But on top of that, where we really get pushback is on political questions.
Oh.
And this is where I've been trying to do this a little bit more, because I feel like bands are not taking strong enough stands on politics as of late, in my opinion. I think, like, there's a lot of things that you can stand against these days, and punk was all about that for so long.
Which is part of the reason
And
why we asked
personally,
it of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys knocked it out of the park. And that's the kind of thing that I'm honestly personally more interested in hearing about, just because if you're really trying to bring out that authenticity, the faith-based question oftentimes doesn't do it.
Wow.
Unless someone has a really, really out there belief, in which Mason and I will definitely jump on that, because we're interested in that too. Because Mason and I have very different beliefs, and I would say 95% of the mainstream church, if
Okay.
not more. So yeah, I would say the political question is really the question that brings out that most authentic, because they don't hear those questions. Bands are like, whoa, what do I do here?
Right.
Kind of,
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
A lot of bigger like mainstream publications might be a little hesitant to
Yeah,
kind of
you bet.
side one way or the other and ask those questions. They or may not, maybe it's not that they, because they're bigger, they're hesitant to, or maybe they just don't have the freedom to, really. As much as
Yeah.
we like to think there's freedom of the press, there's really not, if we're being honest. And
Yeah.
and at least to some extent, just in the corporate world in general, you have to be careful about what you say, where you can get in trouble.
Right.
And so that's another thing I think is really, really cool about what you guys do. And I think a unique opportunity is you might have, like you said, the ability to ask some of those questions that bands either don't get asked or aren't allowed to get asked in other interviews that they might do.
Yeah, I think in regards to the Christian, are you a Christian band question, I think one of the things that's helpful with between Cullen and I versus maybe other podcasts or other like media publications out there that typically will ask that of these kind of bands
Mhm.
is I just graduated from seminary. I'm gonna be getting another
Congratulations.
master's
Congrats.
in another master's in theology. So I'm really
Awesome.
involved. I work at a seminary, so I'm very deeply involved in the religious world. And so I think one of the things that's helpful, at least just from like a skill set for me, is I'm not interested in are you a Christian band question. Super boring, uninteresting.
Okay.
But I know, like, I do my homework enough to know kind of where somebody might be at within their faith, and I'm more interested in talking specifically about that
Yep.
then.
Okay.
Because again, I have a lot of knowledge of where they're at and
Yeah.
what kind of questions would be poignant questions to them, what questions might be a little bit polarizing or questions they might not want to answer based on what I'll know about them. So for example, like one of the things that I found really interesting.
You know how to press those buttons.
I really do. because I know probably more about their own, where they're at than they might.
You can put them in a bucket, in a particular bucket, more than they
Totally.
might be able to put themselves in. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one
Yeah,
of the
that's totally
most
true.
surprising episodes for me was when we were talking with Ronnie Winters from Red Jumpsuit Apparatus.
Okay.
And we like the brief kind of press release that we got from them beforehand, it was kind of talking about how some of their new music is talking a little bit about their faith and some of the current like political climate and everything. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I want to hear a little bit more about that. But it became very clear as Ronnie was talking about some of them. I think we might have asked like the political question before. I don't know exactly when, but it became very clear to me. First off, Ronnie's like super evangelical. Like he's like the kind of guy where he's like, he wants you to know Jesus.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
very, very evangelical. That totally shocked me. I was not expecting that at all. And so because of that, I really wanted to press into that of, okay, you seem to be really, really evangelical in your theology, a theology that I've totally departed from.
Okay.
But yet you still really care a lot about social issues like homophobia and racism and all these different things. Tell me about how you reconcile some of the faith that you grew up with some of these social issues that you care about that oftentimes seem to be irreconcilable within that tradition. See, that's a kind of question that Rolling Stone's not going to ask.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that I find really interesting.
And maybe
I think
doesn't
a lot
have
of-
the knowledge to ask.
Exactly. So I think part of it is just because that's part of the world that I'm in and I know how to ask those questions. And it's also because those are the questions I'm most interested in asking.
Right. That's really cool.
I think something that goes along with that is that Mason and I are both like think out louders. Like we think to each other out loud, oftentimes by arguing with one another. And then afterwards, what we are like vehement with our points. We're like, this is what I believe. And then what we'll do is we'll think back on that conversation. We'll go, wait, I think I agree with him on this point. And I agree with him on this point. And then Mason will probably do the same thing. And then the next time we talk, it's like, oh, now we're on a little bit more of the same page. And I think we kind of do the same thing with our guests. We try to be, we try to, like, set them up where they have a base where they can talk about the things that they want to talk about, but then also challenge them on them a little bit. And then hopefully they go back and they think about it a little bit and they go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Two weird guys on
where
that
I actually
podcast.
What's that?
Remind me of that thing.
We are also two weird guys on a podcast too. And I do think, the harmony between the two, you don't want to both be the exact same kind of like parrot, kind of same thing over and over, but you do definitely want to be interested in the same things. And I know that Jesse and I, that was something that when we first started this, we were both interested in some of the same kind of questions and getting to the heart of some of the same kind of issues. And I think because of that, we've had some really good conversations, even when we didn't really know what we were doing. We started this thing like none of us had ever, Jesse had some journalistic experience from college and doing some interviews with some bands and stuff like that, but we'd never been, in a scenario where, we're sitting here right here with these people and, it's all coming off the cuff and that kind of a thing. And I think that that kind of comes full circle back to the authenticity piece where if you are really trying to, like you were just talking about, Mason, to strike at the heart of an issue and really find out, like, what does this person believe and feel, and how is that influencing their art that they're putting out there, and how is that influencing who they are on a daily basis? How is it influencing how they are making it through this pandemic? That's something that connects with people, and in that way we can be totally fine with the fact that if like 23 people listen to this podcast or watch it on YouTube or whatever, we can say like, man, I bet you for those 23 people that they got something out of this and that it made their day a little bit better. And that's the attitude that Jesse and I have always taken to the stage is, we talk about it all the time, 5 or 500. If 5 people show up there, we're going to give them every single thing we got, and we better walk off the stage, going deaf and sweating to death and bleeding from our knuckles and everything like that, because those 5 people
I
are
wear
just as important.
in-ears for a reason.
Right. So Jesse, I'm going deaf. All of the other stuff applies, but yeah, Jesse and I both have like a sweating competition at the end of the show for who can wring out their shirt into the most number of gallon jugs, and that's the person.
That's really why we don't
And
show
the
up to
other
the
person has to
merch.
drink it, right?
Oh man,
The loser, the person that sweated the least has to drink it.
Yeah, that would be something
That's a
in one
classic cornerstone festival.
I was just about to say,
yeah,
one of those chariot videos, but oh man. Well, hey, one of the things that we have been kind of talking to people about, because we are all very much missing live music, and for those of us who go out on the road and tour, we're missing
Traveling
that,
in
but
general.
yeah, traveling, getting out there, going to shows, as much as we love playing shows, we love going to shows as well. And so we've been asking all of our guests who kind of have a background in the musical side of things about that, but we have some info that you guys might have a very good kind of live music story for us that might make us all nostalgic for it and ready for it to come back. So would you care to share that with us?
So many.
we have a ton,
but I heard there might be one special one.
There's one very special one,
Okay.
mainly because it was over the course of a number of days.
Okay. I already like where this is going.
Do you want me to go through it, Mason, or do you?
Yeah, I don't even know which one you're gonna bring up.
I was gonna do the Colorado trip one.
Oh, sure, great.
Okay.
He's like, what did I do?
I thought you were for sure on the same page with me. I thought that you knew.
I had no idea.
Well, if he's
There's
got
just
another
so
one,
many.
we can do that too.
Oh yeah, we got to hear yours.
Yeah,
too.
let's knock this one out for sure.
So this is more of a story about friendship that's related all around music.
Okay.
So Mason and I were big fans of a band called The National, kind of a, I guess they just did a song with Taylor Swift, so maybe they're not necessarily indie anymore, but
they were definitely in. I would have called them indie for.
yeah. I mean, when we went to go see them, I guess that they were kind of like on the edge of indie.
Yeah.
So we were going to go see them at Red Rocks out in Colorado.
Yeah, we got a chance to go there, not to play there or see anybody there, but just go there. So.
It's even cool just to go see.
Yeah.
Just to sit in the stands by ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally worth it to do that for sure. I would do that in a heartbeat. So we're heading out to. We live in South Dakota, or I live in South Dakota. Mason lives in Minneapolis now, but at the time we were both in South Dakota, and we're making the trip. It's like almost a 10-hour trip, and halfway, almost the exact halfway point, the car that I was still making payments on, the engine blows up.
Oh,
and
we've been there.
I mean, we're pretty much SOL, and I think I was under 24 or 25 or whatever it is at the time, so I couldn't rent a car either. So basically, what happened is we had my car towed to the nearest town, which was North Platte, Nebraska, and
good old North Platte.
Yeah, literally the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And out there on I-80, I'm sure you guys have traveled it a whole bunch.
We've been I-80 a bunch of times. Yep.
Yeah, that is the most desolate drive in the world.
It's extremely boring. It makes Iowa seem like you're driving through the Grand
It is.
Canyon.
Yeah, it's like Disneyland. Yeah. So we go to
Almost
the
as bad
airport.
as Ohio.
Almost as bad as Ohio. Yeah, Ohio, I don't know. There's parts of Ohio that aren't bad.
No, Southeast Ohio is cool, but the 75 South, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Oh yeah.
So North Platte.
So,
back to North Platte.
Yeah, we get to North Platte. My car, I just leave it at a mechanic shop. I was like, call me and when you figure out what might be wrong with it.
Right.
I knew the engine was blowing, but I didn't know how bad. So we decided to get to the airport. And this is before Uber and Lyft and all that stuff. So like we walked over.
As if like North Platte would have Uber or Lyft.
Right. Well, they might. I bet you they do now. But anyways, we get to the airport. We try to go to the Hertz. The Hertz guy's like, no, I can't rent you a car. You're not old enough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? What?
So did you know going to the airport that you weren't old enough, or you didn't even know that was a thing that you couldn't? Yeah.
No, I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah, because people think like 18's a milestone, 21's a milestone.
Right.
Nobody's like, what's the age I can rent a car again?
Yeah. You would think,
right?
Right. So I called my dad. I was like, hey, Dad, would you co-sign for me? And the guy behind the Hertz desk is like, no, I won't do that either.
Oh.
I was like, what?
Yeah, because he's not like physically present or something.
Yeah,
right.
because he wasn't physically present. I was like, we are stranded here. I have no way to get out of here. And what ends up happening is there's this guy that overhears us. He's like in his early 80s. And he's like, do you guys need a ride? We're like, yeah, we're trying to get to Colorado. He's like, oh, well, I live over by McCook, Nebraska. I could give you guys a ride. There's an Amtrak there, and you guys could Amtrak it into Colorado.
Oh man.
Or into Denver.
Oh,
and we're
man.
like, well, we made it this far.
Right.
So we get in the car with this guy, and this is like 120 miles south. Like this is a long trip.
It's like
south.
a 3-hour drive.
With a guy that
well,
you don't know. He could be the
with
Zodiac,
a guy we don't know, yeah.
for all you know.
Yeah, he could have been a serial killer, but he was the nicest guy in the world. If he is listening, or if his grandkids are listening, or someone's listening that knows him, his name is Blake Gigax.
Blake Gigax.
I would love to send him a letter thanking him because the guy was just like the most kind gentleman on
He's
earth.
like one of those people that you would send a Christmas card for the rest of your life, but like that's your only form of connection.
Right.
Yeah. So we get to McCook, and they drops us off at the Amtrak station, and the Amtrak station's like, sorry, the train's a little late. And we're like, well, how late? And they're like, well, it's about 14 hours late.
Whoa.
We were like, what?
Are you in danger of missing the entire show at this point?
Oh yeah, it'd be cutting it close. Like if we made it when the train said it was going to get there, we basically would have had 2 hours maybe.
Okay.
And we had a friend that lives in Colorado that was like, well, I'll give you a ride once you get to Colorado.
Right.
So basically what we decided to do was call up our friend who just got done with a 12-hour day of work and say, hey, you want to drive to McCook, Nebraska and come pick us up? And he's like, yeah, I'll come do that. So he like drove all the way, which is like a 4-hour drive.
Wow.
And then he drove all the way back. I couldn't believe it.
So 8-hour round trip. Thank God for good friends, man.
After he just got done doing a 12-hour day at Zillow, which is where he was working at the time.
Wow.
So basically,
you gotta say the gas station we stopped at in the middle of the night, in the middle of the most desolate part of Colorado.
I don't remember it. I was completely zonked out because I was under had like stress induced sleep.
Oh yeah.
Like I was like, I can't handle any more of this stress. I am sleeping. And I just like could not wake up. So I don't even remember stopping at this gas station.
Oh, there was a point. It's like, it's still outside of the mountains. So it's like pure flatlands of Colorado. And middle of nowhere. It's kind of like the part where like you don't want to be on E.
Yeah.
And
Because you don't
we-
know when the next gas station's coming.
Yeah, and we basically were on E, and
no.
and we were driving, and like somehow, sort of miraculously, this gas station kind of just appeared off the road, and so we pull up in it. At this point, it's like maybe 12, 1 o'clock at night, and so nobody's there, obviously. But we pull up, and we were like, okay, well, maybe at least we can still get gas. And we pull in to a pump, and we're immediately sort of demoralized because we were like, we look at the pump, and it's such an old pump that the gas price indicator literally was like rotary dials.
the
Like, it would
roll like the
rotate
Rolodex.
as like, yes. And we were like, well, this is not going to take a card.
Yeah.
Like, the only way you can pay for it is if you actually went into the store, and
Right.
nobody's
It didn't have
there.
a coin slot where you could just like pump
No,
quarters into.
nothing. So we were like, oh shit. But then right next to it, fortunately, we just like kind of right as we were about to give up hope, right next to it was like a card reader that somehow, some way, shape, or form was rigged up to this thing. And somehow
It
we
was not someone trying to steal your credit card information.
yeah, exactly. So we like swiped it, and sure enough, like it worked, and we were like, oh, thank God, and got to Denver later that night. But
Wow.
it was a weird. Anyway, so that's where we're at in the story. Where else?
Yeah. So we get to my buddy's house, and we like zonk out on the floor, typical broke, don't have any money type style.
Yeah.
And like not him, us. We didn't have any money.
Right.
We were like, hotel?
Right.
You kidding me?
Oh, we've been there.
I'm sure. Hey, band life, right?
Yeah.
And we decide to get up, and we're gonna go up in the hills and then go to the show later that evening. And what ends up happening is right before the show, Mason's like, I have to use the toilet. And we're like, okay, go use the toilet. And this is at my friend's house, by the way, his little 1-bedroom apartment.
Oh no.
And
This was right before the show, right?
right before, like literally, we're like, if we don't leave now, we're gonna be late. Like, we're never gonna get a good spot. So Mason's taking forever in the bathroom, and I'm just like, fine. I just open up the door, and I swing open the door, and Mason's standing on like not the toilet. He's standing on the edge of the tub, butt ass naked, covering his junk, and going, ah! And I'm like, what are you doing? And I look down, and there's just water flowing out of the toilet. And there's just birds flying all over the place. I'm like, what?
This is why Mason didn't want you to tell this story. But he's
Not
being
the
a
first
great
time either.
It was
being a
repressed.
great
It was
sport
pushed out
about
of
it.
his mind. Just so you know, Mason's not a big dude. He's like, what are you, Mason? 115 pounds, 120 pounds?
Oh, give me a break. Played college football, not college soccer.
Yeah, you're half that weight now, though. Anyways, so Mason's not a big guy. He's
My
not a big
my
guy.
dog weighs 135 pounds. So.
That's a big dog.
Yeah, great Dane.
Mason's not a big guy, but Mason is known for clogging toilets in just about every single house that any of us have ever lived in or rented. It's insane. Anyways, so
Mason,
we're,
you got to
like,
get him
late.
back after this.
I know this is bad. No, I
Oh,
mean
he
this
will,
is
I'm
great,
sure.
but yeah, I feel for you, Mason. But please continue.
So I'm like, Mason, we have to go. We need to clean this up really, really fast. But like, there's literally a full inch or more of water in the entire bathroom.
Wow.
And
Water.
my friend is like, just go, take my car, I'll clean it up. The guy who just like drove 8 straight hours after a 12-hour day of work. I know, I could kiss the guy.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Not
Anyways,
after you
we
touch
take his car to the
turd
show.
water, though.
Yeah, no, don't kiss
What
him
about-
after that.
Yeah, I know. Could you? I couldn't believe that he even talked to us after that.
Oh man.
He does give Mason the side eye just about every single time he looks at him.
Yeah. It's just liquid Ebola. Just
Mason, you should just you guys should go hang out with him at his current place, and the first thing you should say when you walk in is, can I go use the can I use the bathroom? Where's
I
the
really
bathroom?
need to take a shit, Nathan.
Oh no.
I ate some tacos
What a
today,
guy,
and they're
though.
just not sitting there.
I know.
What a guy.
I
He
know.
just said
His
go
name
ahead.
is Nathan Van Manen. He's one of the best humans ever on earth. So he also lets us borrow his car, and I drive it to the to Red Rocks. and we go and enjoy the show. The show is absolutely amazing. We got terrible seats because Mason made us late. I almost got in a fight with a guy there unintentionally. And
We need
what
to
else?
go.
There's something else that happened.
We need to go find this friend of yours, and have him do a
Yeah,
little
he's the
cameo
next.
to
He's the next
explain-
guest for sure.
Yeah.
Already
Oh,
Oh,
decided.
he would
his
love
side of
that.
this
He's actually
story.
trying to make some EDM music.
We got
so
4
he'd be
episodes
great.
left in this season. He's all 4.
Yeah, there you go.
Just tell us about Colorado.
Yeah, seriously. We'll just say the incident. He'll know what we mean.
The
but-
incident. Yeah, he'll probably know.
Oh man.
So we go and watch the show. The National put on a fantastic show. They played a bunch of songs from their new album that hadn't come out yet, which we were all happy about. And then we leave, and when we go out to the car, the battery's stone dead.
No.
I'm just like, this is exactly what would happen.
Come
isn't it?
on.
So he had like an older CRV, and I wasn't used to the fact that I had to shut off the lights. I just was used to automatic lights, so I left the lights running.
Oh, so you
we had to,
and Jesse have a lot in common.
I did that once. It's not my fault. I don't drive a conversion van from the 1990s.
It's an 02, but yeah.
It's an 02.
Same difference.
I love it. So the like almost everyone's gone by the time we get out to the car, and like thankfully I'm like running around like, can we borrow some leads? Can we borrow a jumper cable?
Right.
And finally someone's like, yeah, I got one, I'll come jump you. And like thankfully he jumped us. We got back, and like his radio wouldn't work in his car or anything like that because we jumped the battery. The guy jumped it wrong. I don't know what happened. Reverse polarity. It was a terrible but awesome thing, because it was definitely stress inducing to me, but it was also like a time that we will remember forever.
Absolutely.
You're
Well,
missing the climax of the story, Cullen.
What was the climax?
enlighten
Okay,
us.
so
The climax
I
wasn't the
forgot.
turd water.
so we had to get back to South Dakota.
Oh yeah,
So-
I forgot.
Yeah, so we have to go back to South Dakota. So the next day we go to, I think it was Hertz, right?
We went
At
to Hertz.
Denver International Airport. So like the big Hertz in
no.
Denver.
Take
we go
2.
there.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, so here's the deal. Like, we desperately need to rent a car. We have to get back, like a one-way kind of trip. Our car blew out. Anyway, we were like, long story short,
Right,
we need to
right.
get back to Sioux Falls. And they were like, but here's the problem. Like, we tried to rent a car at a Hertz in North Platte, Nebraska, and they wouldn't let us because we're all under 25. And they're like, oh, that's no problem. You just have to pay an additional fee. We were like, what?
Wish. Oh no. Oh no. See,
So anyway,
Ugh.
we got a car and we went back to Sioux Falls.
See, I was about to congratulate Cullen, because I was like, this is in true band guy fashion. Like, I know you guys have said you're not in bands, but in true band guy fashion, this is such a the show must go on mentality. You're not thinking at all about how are we going to get home. It's just, we have to get there. We have to get to the show. And I mean, that could have been an economic decision, because I'm sure the Red Rocks tickets weren't cheap, but
Well, thankfully I bought them well in
loving
advance.
I was
wasn't
absolutely
thinking
loving
about
that.
leaving.
But then old theology major over here had to come and be the stick in the mud and remind us that you had to get back. No, that's incredible. Wow. And Mason, what a good sport for
And during
Oh,
that story, oh
yeah.
my goodness.
yeah.
The thing
that's-
is like there's so many other like stories revolving around me taking a shit and plugging the toilet. Like
Yeah.
it really was like it was a matter of time that he was gonna say one of these, and
oh man, that's great. That,
Oh,
I feel like
no.
this is like one of the least embarrassing ones.
that's awesome.
Yeah, that honestly is. It honestly is one of the least embarrassing.
Well, it's crazy because we've had a lot of bands on here and there's been a lot of crazy stories, but you guys, despite not being in a band, might have just gifted us with the best tour story that we've had yet. So
Dude,
thank you very much for that.
That means so much. I can't even tell you.
I do have
Holy
a
cow.
short one too, if I could share.
Blast
Absolutely,
off.
let's
Let's
go
go.
for it.
I don't think it's like our best one. It's a short one that's just kind of really fun.
Go for it.
So probably, what was it, 2012, 2011, we went to Sunshine Festival in Minnesota.
Oh yeah.
A lot of face down, tooth and nail bands. And we get there, we get like to our hotel really late at night, and Cullen and I were watching like a YouTube video of this show that just so happened to have a guy, it was like a sketch comedy show, and one of the actors in it is this guy who grew up in the same little small town that we grew up in.
Okay.
And so it's kind of one of those, like, you kind of have a connection to the show, so you just really like it. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
we're watching a YouTube video of these sketch comedy shorts. And at one point there was one, I don't know, we must have never seen it before for some reason, but we
lost it.
watched it and we literally burst out laughing. It was probably the most like guttural of laughs I've ever had for the longest period of time. I mean, it was like a good 10 to 15 minutes that we were like
Least.
constantly laughing.
When you get
It's one of those
stuck,
things that, like,
stuck in like that laugh
Yeah,
loop.
yeah,
I
exactly. It
know.
was just
Yeah.
a loop. We couldn't get out of
Yep.
it. It was so much. It was so funny. Anyway, so we're like probably waking up the entire hotel.
Right.
Specifically our neighbors.
Yeah.
Specifically our neighbors, which we're about to reveal in a second. So anyway, we go to the show, we go to the festival, go to the shows and everything. It's great. We get to see Under Oath that night. And anyway, we get back to our hotel late that night, and we see this huge bus right outside in the parking lot of this hotel. We were like, what in the world? I mean, this is Wilmer, Minnesota. Like,
Right.
got to be a part of the festival.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, we're like, well, this is a big, maybe it's a big band. That'd be kind of cool, but whatever. So anyway, we go in, sleep that night. We get up the next morning, and for some reason, I had to like go out to the hotel desk to like get a pair of scissors or something. So I go out to the hotel desk.
You never
I
know
start-
when you're gonna need a pair of scissors.
Yeah. So I'm like walking back, and all of a sudden, just like out of the bathroom, as sort of like at the same time that I'm walking, out comes this guy with really long dreads, kind of skinny white guy, and tatted everywhere. And I'm like, that's Spencer Chamberlain. And I'm just
Totally
walking next,
fanboyed.
and I'm just kind of walking next to him. Didn't say a thing, just like knowing, okay, I know who this guy
Right.
is. He
Play
doesn't know who
cool.
I'm.
Play it cool. Play it cool.
And
Mason.
like I'm trying to play cool, and the only thing I could like kind of muster out of like, hey, like I know who you are. It was just like the only thing I said was, hey, I really liked your show last night.
Hey man, nice set.
Yeah, and so anyway, like I get to my room, he kind of like takes a corner, and then like right next to our room, he goes into that room. So literally right next door to us. And I like go into the room with Cullen. Cullen's still in our hotel room. I yell at him like, Under Oath is literally right next to us staying. And so he like jumps out really quick, and all of a sudden all the guys from Under Oath just like get out of that room and like pass by us. And Cullen I remember he's like just halfway out the door, just like, hey, nice show last night, guys. And they just all walk by. They're like, hey, thank you or whatever. But so we had to have like woken up Under Oath that night before when we were just gutturally
right before they were
laughing.
about to put on their big
Yeah.
festival show.
And it was at like, I don't know, probably 2 a.m. when we were laughing like that.
Oh,
and,
man.
Because our buddy of ours who had come really late and joined us. But oh man, I felt so bad.
You know what, man?
Definitely.
Even the cheapest of motels have some pretty solid soundproofing. I mean, think about the last time you were in a hotel and you actually heard anything that anybody else was doing. So you were probably
That is
fine.
true.
Spencer
That is
probably
true.
doesn't
I
hate
hope
you
so.
for the rest of your life. But hey, you could always reach out and see if he wants to be on the podcast, and then you would know. So
Yeah,
That's true.
There you go.
We should do that and bring that up.
hey man, remember that time in 2012 when I accidentally woke you up, or might have? I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't.
Actually, he's probably like unprompted. He's gonna be like, there was that one time in 2012, these asshats decided to just start laughing at 2 a.m. in Minnesota.
Yeah, just say, what's your worst?
Like,
what was your
I don't
worst?
know. I don't know what you're talking about.
What was your worst ever experience with Sunshine Fest, and maybe particularly with the sleeping arrangements or something like that? So, it's awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being on with us. This has been a great episode and a really good time, and it was cool to see the flip side. So if anybody hasn't already listened to it, they should definitely go back and check out the time that we were on your podcast.
Absolutely.
But if anybody is looking to get in touch with you guys or just figure out where your show is and all that, where would you direct them?
You can find our podcast on any podcast streaming app, Apple and Spotify and all the ones that any of you would use. And then, we also are pretty active on social media. I would say probably most active on like Instagram. So if you want to follow us on Instagram, it's just the BlackSheep Podcast, all lowercase, all one word. And so if you just want to give us a follow there and check us out, we're always looking to connect with our fans and listeners.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Hang in there in this crazy, hopefully end stretch of this nastiness that we've all been going through, and hopefully we'll be able to actually catch you guys in person. Maybe we'll get a hotel room next to you, and you'll keep us up all night right before we're supposed to play a big important set. So
Just don't come use the restroom in our room.
yes. Off limits.
It was great to chat with you guys.
Yeah, you guys
Absolutely.
too.
You guys are fantastic. You guys are some of my favorite people on earth. for
Oh
sure.
man, so maybe you just don't know us well enough
thank you.
yet. Then maybe you haven't let us into your friend's bathroom yet. So all right, guys. Well, we will talk to you very soon, and have a good one.
Sweet.
Awesome.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the American Arson Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a positive comment or review. Connect with us online through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, and check out AmericanArson.com for music, merch, and upcoming tour dates. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, stay inspired, stay positive, and keep creating.